Welcome back to Mr. DuPage's classroom. This lesson is for my Algebra 1 class. It is 10.6, Day 1 Notes, the quadratic formula. We have a warm-up. Solve the quadratic equation by completing the square and then sketch the graph using vertex form. What you're going to notice is that all of the numbers in that equation are divisible by 3. So we're going to go ahead and divide everything by 3 to start off this problem. So when I divide everything by 3, I would get x squared minus 5x minus 3 is equal to 0. I need to add my 3 in order to make my blank, so I'd have x squared minus 5x plus blank equals 3 plus blank. Okay? Now what I need to do is to go ahead and find my blanks. I'll take the negative 5 from my b value, divide by 2. That would get me negative 2.5. Negative 2.5 squared is going to get me 6.25. Now I can factor. I will use x minus, because I take negative 5, divide by 2, that's going to get me 2.5 squared equals 3 plus 6.25, which is 9.25. If I square root all of that, I would end up with x minus 2.5 is equal to plus or minus 3.04. At this point, I need to add my 2.5 over to get my x by itself. So I'd have x equals 2.5 plus or minus 3.04. If I take 2.5 and add 3.04, I end up with 5.54. And if I take 2.5 minus 3.04, I end up with negative 0.54. So those are my two x-intercepts. Now I need to find my vertex. Remember, I'm going to find my vertex from this section here. So I'd have x minus 2.5 squared is equal to 9.25. I need to subtract my 9.25 from both sides. When I do that, I end up with x minus 2.5 squared minus 9.25. I'm going to use the opposite of the negative 2.5 for my vertex, so it would be positive 2.5. And I'm going to follow the sign of the negative 9.25, so negative 9.25 is my y value. Now I need to go ahead and plot this point, or these points. So the 5.54 will be somewhere in there, so we want to make this 5.54 comma 0. The negative 0.54 would be somewhere really close to the 0. So this would be negative 0.54 comma 0. Now the last thing I need to do is find my vertex. So 2.5 would be somewhere right in the middle. Go down to negative 9.25. So this point would be 2.5 comma negative 9.25. Go through all of my points. And I have a sketch of my graph. Using the knowledge of completing the square, mathematicians were able to derive a formula that will always be able to solve any quadratic of the form 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. This led them to a reasonably simple formula called the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula, which if you read right here, says you need to memorize. If ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 and a is not equal to 0, then the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that is over 2 times a. It's going to be really simple once you start seeing this, but to start with, I understand this looks a little scary. Okay? How does this make sense for what we know about quadratics and completing the square? We can start with the quadratic equation and complete the square to solve for x. How do I get from that to our quadratic formula? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to do that right now. I may show you guys in class, but I'm not going to worry about that right this second in this video. Okay? What you need to know is this equation right here. All right? So what I would do as we move to the back is I would probably write that equation up top. So it's x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. Okay? Now, How do I find these different numbers that go in for A, B, and C? Those will come from the coefficients of each one of my terms in the quadratic equation. So I have x squared as my first term. Well, the number in front of x squared is 1. That is my A value. And then I have negative 5x. So my B value is the number in front of that. It's negative 5. Then my C value comes from that 6. It is just the 6. So now all I'm doing at this point is I'm going to take those numbers and plug them in for the letters. So x equals, the first thing I run into is the opposite of b. So it would be negative 5. The opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I'd take negative 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 6. All of that is going to be over 2 times a, which is 1. Now, we don't have a lot of room, so I'm not going to force you to write this entire thing out. What you can do is you can take what is underneath of the square root, parenthesis negative 5, parenthesis squared, minus 4, parenthesis 1, parenthesis, then parenthesis 6, parenthesis. You can type that straight through in your calculator. If you type that straight through in your calculator, what you're going to find out is that underneath of the square root, I have 1 all over 2. 2 times 1 is 2. So what I just did there is I just simplified all of the different locations that have some multiplication problems that I can do. All right. Now that I know that, what I can do is take the square root of 1. So I have x equals 5 plus or minus 1 over 2. At this point, I need to write two different equations because I have 5 plus or minus 1. So I'll write x equals 5 plus 1 over 2 and x equals 5 minus 1 over 2. Well, 5 plus 1 is 6 over 2, so x would equal 3. 5 minus 1 is 4 over 2, so x would equal 2. Those are the answers to that quadratic equation. All right. Moving on to part 2. My a in this equation again is 1. My b is negative 2. My c is negative 8. So we need to plug that into our equation. The opposite of b would be positive 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So negative 2 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 8. All over 2 times a, which is 1. Remember, if you are struggling to keep up writing this stuff down, go ahead and pause it after I get done writing something down, write that down, then start watching the video again and listen to what I'm saying, okay? So now, if you have your calculator with you, go ahead and type in everything that's under the square root. So 2 plus or minus, type it in exactly the way you see it. So parenthesis, negative 2, parenthesis, raised to the second power, minus 4, then use the parentheses for times 1 times negative 8. If you do that correctly, what you're going to get is the square root of 36, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. Now we know what the square root of 36 is. That would be 2 plus or minus 6, all over 2. Now that I have a plus or minus in my numerator, what I'm going to do is split this into two separate equations. So x equals 2 plus or minus, not plus or minus, I'm sorry. This would just be plus. So x equals 2 plus 6 over 2. So x equals 8 over 2. X would equal 4. The other equation I need to write is x equals 2 minus 6 over 2. 2 minus 6 is negative 4 over 2. X equals negative 4. Or negative 2, I'm sorry. Those are the answers for those problems. Now I'm going to skip 3 and 4. If you guys have questions over this stuff, we can go through those when we meet again, okay? What advantage does a quadratic formula have over other methods? It can always solve any quadratic No matter what the quadratic equation is, you can use the quadratic formula to solve it. And that's why it is called the quadratic formula, because it can be used to solve any quadratic. Now for the story problem. If you understand that the quadratic formula can solve anything, and if you can read and take the velocities and plug their numbers into the correct place, these are not overly difficult. It's going to be pretty close to the same problem every single time with a few different numbers, okay? So what it says is the height, h, in feet of an object t seconds after it is launched, is given by the formula h equals negative 16t squared plus v subscript 0 times t plus h subscript 0. With the initial height being h0, so the initial height is this h0, and the initial velocity being this v0, okay? So we know v0 is the initial velocity, h0 is the initial height. All the t's you see there are the amount of time in seconds, and that h that everything is equal to is the height we are looking for. All right, so that's the equation we're going to use no matter what. A machine shoots a ball straight up in the air at an initial velocity of 85 feet per second. Why did I underline that? Because I know somewhere in my equation I have to use initial velocity, right? The machine releases the ball 5 feet off the ground. Well, if it releases the ball 5 feet off the ground, that means that is the height that my ball started at. So now what we need to do is set up our formula, okay? So our formula is this equation with us plugging in our initial velocity and our initial height. So h is the height we're looking for, not our initial height. It's the height we're going to be looking for, is equal to negative 16t squared plus VO was my initial velocity. Well, my initial velocity, according to what I have underlined, is 85. So I'll put 85 in for VO. Now, VO is gone. I don't want to think about VO anymore. So 85 times t plus HO is my initial height. So where did the machine release the ball? Well, 5 feet off the ground. Okay? So I'll put 5 in for HO. HO is now gone. I no longer have to worry about that. How long does it take for the ball to hit the ground? Well, the ground is at what height? If you think about standing on the ground and you measure from the ground, well, the ground's going to be 0. So what we're looking for is for our h to equal the ground, which is 0. So I'm going to rewrite my equation, negative 16t squared plus 85t plus 5 is equal to 0. At this point, what I can do is I can use the quadratic formula to solve for when the ball hits the ground. So my quadratic formula is x equals. X is going to be the time when the ball hits the ground. Okay? It's the opposite of b. Well, b is 85, so negative 85 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 85 squared, minus 4 times my a value, which is negative 16, times my c value, which is this positive 5. All of that is going to be over 2 times my a value, which again is negative 16. Okay? Now again, just like we did up top, if you type in everything underneath your square root sign correctly, so you can type in 85 squared minus 4, parenthesis negative 16, and then parenthesis 5, what you're going to end up with is x equals negative 85 plus or minus the square root of, I don't have that, sorry. Type that through my calculator real quick, I'm sorry. So 85 squared minus 4, parenthesis, negative 16, parenthesis 5. You'll end up with the square root of 7,545 over 2 times negative 16 is going to be negative 32. Now that I have that, what I can do is take the square root of 7,545 and get x equals negative 85 plus or minus, the square root of that is 86.86 all over negative 32. Now that I have the plus or minus in my numerator, what I'm going to do is set up two separate equations. So I'll have negative 85 plus 86.86 over negative 32. If I do that, negative 85 plus 86.86, I will end up with, and then divide it by negative 32, I'll end up with x equals negative 0.05. Then x equals negative 85 plus 86.86 over negative 32. Oh, minus, I'm sorry. I apologize. Erase that plus sign. We already did negative 85 plus, so we need to do negative 85 minus 86.86. Then divide by negative 32, I end up with 5.37. Now here's my question for you. If I'm looking at time in seconds, it's very, very similar to distance. Can I have a negative amount of time? If you're going to say yes, that means that you have a time machine sitting somewhere at your house that you really need to start selling, because a lot of people would love that. But no, you cannot have a negative time, so my answer is going to be 5.37 seconds. Okay? Now, part B says the ball will be at a height of 25 feet at 2 times. If you think about this, what you're going to see is the ball travels like that. So say 25 feet is that line. It's going to hit at 25 feet. It's going to get to its highest point and then start coming down and hit at 25 feet again. Okay? So since it says that, it asks at what time is the ball going to be at 25 feet. What I'm going to do is take my original equation, which I have right up here, and in for h, I'm going to put 25. So I have negative 16t squared plus 85t plus 5 is equal to the height that we're looking for. Well, again, in this equation, or this story problem, we're looking for the ball to reach 25 feet. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I have to have it set equal to 0 to use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to subtract 25 from both sides. That will give me negative 16t squared plus 85t. 5 minus 25 would be negative 20, is all equal to 0. Okay? Now that I have it equal to 0, I can use my quadratic formula. So I'm going to use x equals the opposite of b. Well, my b is 85. So negative 85 plus or minus the square root of b again, 85 squared, minus 4 times my a value, which is negative 16, times my c value, which is now negative 20. Okay? And all of that is going to be over 2 times my a value, which again is negative 16. Now, if you type everything straight through in your calculator underneath the square root sign, you're going to end up with x equals negative 85 plus or minus the square root of 5,945. All of that will be over 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. Now from here, I'm going to work my way up. I need to go ahead and split my two equations. So I'll have x equals, actually I'm not going to split them yet, I need to know what the square root of 5,945 is. So if I take the square root of 5,945, I get negative 85 plus or minus 77.1 over negative 32. At this point, I can go ahead and split it into two separate equations. So x equals negative 85 plus 77.1 over negative 32. In order to type this into your calculator successfully, take negative 85 plus 77.1, hit enter. Without changing anything else, then divide by negative 32. What you will end up with is x equals 0.25. Now for the other equation, it would be x equals negative 85 minus 77.1 divided by negative 32. So x, if I type negative 85 minus 77.1, hit enter, then divide by negative 32, I'll end up with 5.07. Now, since both of those answers are positive, those are the 2 points in time that we will reach 25 feet. So after a quarter of a second and after 5.07 seconds is when the ball will reach 25 feet. The most important thing here to remember is the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula, again, is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is over 2 times a. You need to understand the quadratic formula. You need to memorize that quadratic formula. And then you need to understand how I can get my numbers that I plug in for each letter. If you are still struggling with this after this video, please make sure you come in and see me. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching the video, and have a great day.